Porsche's Taycan EV Super Saloon changes electric vehicle design as we know it. The way it looks, the way it drives, the way it brakes, the way it charges, everything has been reconsidered, redesigned and reimagined. The result is a standard-setting battery-powered model that's purely Porsche and very desirable indeed. And here, in the industry's most comprehensive and detailed test, we're going to find out why. Lots here is different, but one thing here is predictable. With all the torque on offer here developed instantly, it's going to be very, very fast. And of course, this Taycan is. Even the least powerful variant at launch, the 4S, has 530 PS on tap and hits 62 mile an hour from rest in 4 seconds flat. But the models most will choose, the Turbo and the Turbo S version I'm trying here, both begin at an output starting point of 625 PS, then build on it with an Overboost function that supplies a few seconds of extra launch or overtaking acceleration. That increases output on the Turbo version to 680 PS, which sees that car demolish the 62 mile an hour sprint in just 3.2 seconds en route to 161 miles an hour. With this Turbo S, there's potentially 761 PS and a stupendous 1,050 Newton meters of pulling power beneath your right foot, enough to trim that sprint figure to just 2.8 seconds. Now, even if you've driven cars as quick as that before, take it from me, this one will feel faster because everything's there all at once, like switching on a light. Less like a sports car, more like some sort of extreme fairground ride. Of course, it won't travel too far between charges if you habitually drive like this. The base 4S variant's smaller 79.2 kilowatt-hour pack makes that model particularly limited in that regard. But even if you upgrade that car to the 93 kilowatt-hour battery size the two turbo spec models get as standard, the WLTP range rating still only sits in the 208 to 288 mile bracket, which is way off what you get in a rival Tesla. Potentially, this Porsche can charge up much quicker than its American rival, though. Theoretically, you can pump in 62 miles of range every 5 minutes, thanks to this car's more sophisticated 800-volt power supply system. Though only if you're fortunate enough to find an 800-volt public charger, which can allow this car to replenish itself at its peak charging capacity of 270 kilowatts, which isn't likely with our country's undeveloped national charging infrastructure. So that's a slight disappointment, but the rather unique way this car has been engineered offers ample compensation. The battery pack powers two synchronous electric motors, one on each axle, hence the all-wheel drive capability, with the rear motor linked to a 2-speed auto gearbox, the lower ratio reserved for those savage launch control starts. All of it's been engineered to work with a veritable arsenal of Zuffenhausen engineering in an attempt to try and make a car with the lumbering curb weight of Porsche's Cayenne E hybrid SUV handle something like a proper sports saloon should. None of the dynamic stuff in play here is anything we haven't seen before. Torque vectoring, adaptive damping with 3-chamber air suspension, and optionally rear wheel steering and PDCC electromechanical roll stabilisation. But with Porsche's 4D chassis control setup coordinating it all like the conductor of an orchestra, the result through the turns is quite simply astonishing when you consider the amount of weight in play here. There are drive modes, of course, normal for the everyday, range if you've an eye on depleting battery capacity, or sport, or if you've gone for the Sport Chrono Pack, Sport Plus for when you're pushing on. And the steering, brakes and ride quality are all brilliant, almost 911-like. No other EV drives like this. The soul of a sports car? That about covers it. So, a Porsche like no other before it, but very definitely a Porsche. All the key elements of Zuffenhausen brand design are there. The special topography of the bonnet and front wings, air intakes instead of a dominant radiator grille, the Mark's so-called flyline, falling roofline, and a strong shoulder at the rear. These are elements that characterise every Porsche, but have, says design chief Michael Mauer, been subtly evolved in this one. You might have been expecting it to be an SUV. Every other competing brand took that route in creating its first luxury full electric vehicle. Not only because crossovers are trendy, but because their high stance disguises the ungainly need to place the passenger compartment on top of a huge battery pack, which would look odd in, say, a large luxury sports saloon, which was what Porsche decided to create here. A car that, amongst EVs, is absolutely unique in its proportions. An emotionally charged performance sedan that sits just 1,380 millimetres high, yet is almost 2 metres wide. There's really nothing like it. Here again, classic Porsche design staples mixed with modern technology. So thanks to this low seat and raised centre console, there's a real cockpit-style feel that's refreshingly different from the raised SUV demeanour of obvious luxury EV rivals. And the instrument cluster is wider than the steering wheel in a manner reminiscent of the original 911. Take a closer look and you'll find that what lies behind the chunky 3-spoke wheel is anything but retro. A 16.8-inch curved digital screen, one of up to 4 here at the front of the cabin. There's a lower 8.4-inch touchpad on the centre console, just below a 10.9-inch PCM Porsche Communication Management Central Infotainment Monitor, which can be optionally extended with a further supplementary display here for the front seat passenger. There's a lot to take in. Now, all of this feels entirely appropriate to a cutting-edge 21st century premium EV, but you can't help sometimes feeling that old-fashioned knobs and buttons, particularly on this lower centre display, would be easier and more intuitive to use on the move. There are other curiosities too, this rather hidden knurled gear shifter, plus you're not offered any sort of handbrake button, and there are no mechanically operated louvers for the air vents either. You'll have to activate them via this lower screen. Still, you adjust to all of this quite quickly, and the instrument screen in particular has been well thought through, based, as you can see, around these 3 configurable round virtual dials. Right, time to take a look in the rear. Now, earlier we referenced the design difficulties inherent in not creating an electric vehicle of this kind as an SUV. How, in an ordinary sedan body shape, do you avoid the high stance that usually results from perching the passenger cabin on top of a whole bank of batteries? The kind of stance this Taycan just doesn't have. How have the designers managed it? Very cleverly. The rear footwells here might look conventional, but they're actually hollowed out sections of the floor plan. Porsche calls them foot garages that allow your feet to be positioned at the same lower height as the battery pack, rather than being placed on top of it. No other EV design team has previously thought of doing this. For a GT-style sports saloon, headroom is actually pretty good, and surprisingly, it actually improves by a few inches if you opt for the extra-cost panoramic glass roof. This centre tunnel is particularly high, another reason why you might not want that centre seat, but it does at least give this 2-seat layout a cocooned, sports car-like feel. Right, let's finish with a look at boot space, starting not at the boot, but here at the front. Yes, like a 911, you get a little storage space beneath the bonnet, and it is little, just 84 litres in capacity. So anything of any size will have to be stored in the rear cargo area, accessed via this power-operated boot lid, which rises to reveal a 366-litre space. That's 37 litres less than you get in Porsche's Panamera 4E hybrid model, though in this case you'll probably find it's quite substantially accounted for by this charging lead case. The conventional rear seating arrangement only leaves you with this 60-40 seatback split. If, like us, you'd begun to imagine that the golden age of the motor car was well behind us, there's cause for hope here. and even for an argument that a really well-engineered EV can restore to enthusiasts some of the driving involvement and excitement that's been lost in recent decades as powerful petrol engines have become sanitised by turbochargers, particulate filters and camera-driven technology. Ultimately, those petrol engines have to go, but what replaces them doesn't necessarily have to be an automotive domestic appliance. The Taycan proves that. It is, exactly as its brand promised, a true Porsche for the age of electromobility. And for the right kind of customer, will be desired, loved and coveted like no other. It is quite simply an astonishing achievement.